Good morning. Hemshech Beis, Volume 2, page 1166. So like close to the top of the page. So what we're discussing here is how Atzilus is a mamutza between bli gvul and gvul, basically. So with the moshel of the keiches hanefesh, the faculties of the soul, that on one hand, they're not the core etzem and essence of the soul. On the other hand, they're not a mahus achar. They're not another personality. They are extensions. They're expressions of the soul would be the best way. So they're levushim, but the levushim that are connected to the core. So the core gets concealed within them, as he used the word from the Pasuk Eliyah, is kasiyos ben bnei nasha, in these levushim. Okay, Ein Sof is concealed within the chokhmah, the bina, the das of the esespheres, and it channels itself through chokhmah. Same thing is with Atzilus, that the esespheres of Atzilus is not the core essence of the divine, but it's an expression of it. So on one hand, it's ischachus because it is not the esem itself. On the other hand, ischachus mamish esespheres Atzilus ein elikus mamish umiyachodim betachlis be'erein sof baruch hu. So bechinas kiruv, and that's why they're mamutza ben abli gvul and bechinas agvul. Because the 10 spheres therefore have two sides to them, two aspects. Bechinas hagbala, bechinas metzias davar, mekom mokem, bechinas alakus mamish. U'kamaya keches, she'en chutz la'atzmas ha'nefesh, bechinas keches mamish, u'mekom mokem en keches nafshim en mahus ha'nefesh. They're not external forces. They're not like instruments like a hammer or a screwdriver or a separate garment. They are faculties. They're soulful faculties. However, they're faculties. They're not the soul itself. And one more line, which I didn't read yesterday. I should have read it because it really belongs to this section. So I'm continuing now in the line that begins, U'mekom mokim henkeches nafshim m'mahus ha'nefesh v'zeu gamkein. And this is also the reason mashatzilus nikra elam. Remember back on page 1162, he introduced that it's called an elam. It's called a domain. There's a structured world there. Atzilus is called an elam Atzilus. Because as we learned there, elam comes from the word helam, and he asked the question, if it's elikus, how could it be a helam? So the answer is it's a helam on all of elikus. It's like concealing the infinite divine, infinite. But what it is godly. It's just godliness in a particular structure. So it's a helam legabe all of godliness. But it's not. But what it is only a reflection of godliness. So in other words, the tzimtzum is concealing the infinite divine, the infinite Ein Sof. But it's not concealing elikus. It's concealing all of that. So what you have here is the elikus in the tziyur of in the form of a structure. So it's essentially a structured divine within structure, if you wish. The structure of the divine. That's Atzilus. Bria is not, you can't call it Lakus Mamish. Bria is already a structure that's not purely divine, meaning that it has its own independent identity, as we shall learn. Now, yesterday the question was asked about, is this the Eidus of Atzilus, the Kalim of Atzilus? So I said clearly, unequivocally, HaChochma ma'ayin temotza, back in the beginning of Ayin Beis, in the fourth Maimer, the Maimer of Nosei and Balescha, he made it clear that it's also referring to Oyer, not just the Keli, but the Oyer also is has an element of tziyur, a shape in it, and some mitzias. So on that sense of that side of things, therefore both the Oyeris and Kelim are like the faculties, and then what's higher than that is the Oyer that's not defined in structure. So now he's going to qualify this and say the following. He's going to say that elsewhere it explains this mashal of the koyach hamaskel and seichel that we've been using here is used on kelim, not on eiris. So the Rebbe Rashab in his thorough style is going to now qualify and bring different aspects to this whole thing. Okay. So now here's what the Rebbe Rashab says. Before I continue, I just want to say one more point which I should have mentioned. And that is, in the context of koiches hanefesh and the actual koiches, so he said the statement, the following. The word ischachus, let's talk about more of the ischachus. So he said when seichel comes, actual seichel, chachma, comes from the nefesh, it comes b'derech ischachus. Because koyach hamaskil, which is the root that conceives ideas, is not yet a form of seichel. That's why when we think of an idea, when we conceive of an idea, we know it's coming from somewhere, but we don't know where it's coming from. In the words that he used here, there's two things. He said, margish, what's the lashon here? Margish as mekere. It doesn't feel its source of Mekol Mokim, margish, ari margish Mekom shenimshach me'ezeh mokim. In other words, there are three states. A yeshma ayin completely does not feel its source and does not feel that it has a source. Seichel does not feel its source, but it feels that it has a source. And then there's, of course, the level itself, which is the koyach hamaskel itself. So in a way, Seichel from koyach hamaskel is not yeshma ayin. It's also not pure gilia helam. It's a combination of ischachus and nachus. It's ischachus because it doesn't feel its source, but it feels that it has a source. So there's some level of connection, but it's more in a way that there's a certain ma'ayin to matzah from it.
Is koyach hamaskel part of the nefesh?
Yeah, that's the koyach hamaskel is basically how the koyach is kolol ba nefesh. Yeah. Yeah. In other words, we learned this also earlier, especially in Tzadik Daled. There's the nefesh itself that's l'mayla mekol ha-keiches. There's the keiches ha-klulim b'nefesh, and then there's the keich goli. So keich ha-mask is like the keiches ha-klulim b'nefesh. But even there, if you remember, there's etzem hiyuli, and there's the keich ha-mask. Etzem hiyuli doesn't even have the shape. It's not even designated to seichel. Keich ha-mask l'chol ha-poches is not keich l'ischasid. So it's levels. It's not relevant to our discussion here so much, because here it's more about nefesh and keiches. But once he brought the keiches, he brought the difference between the keich ha-seichel chachma in Atzilus, and let's say how chachma is nichlal in chachma stima in keser, in arich or even atik. So there's a chidush ma'ayin to matzah. On the other hand, it's not complete because it does feel that it has a source. Now remember, I should probably qualify this as well. Yesterday there was a long discussion. What does it mean, the awareness? When you say Chachma is aware of its source, but it's not, but Chachma is aware that it has a source, but it's not aware of its source. So as I explained, I wouldn't call it in an active type of awareness that Chachma is sitting here and is thinking about that. That's just a moshel for our conversation. It much deeper would be said that Chochmah is B'tziyusei, like I said, state of being. Its whole state of being is Elokus. Elokus that manifests through Chochmah. Like we said, Hu levadei ve'ein zolosei. So then what's the difference between Margish es Mekedei, Margish sheyesh moker, or Margish es Mekedei? The answer is, what is this state of being? Is it Chochmah, Chochmah's experience of Elokus in Chochmah? And that there's also a level of bittul that there's something beyond chachma, or not. So in other words, there's basically, even in levels of bittul legamri where you're in the zone, in full awareness, doesn't mean that you're outside of it. It's just a question, what are you aware of? What is this level about? Chachma captures elokus b'tzuras chachma. It does not capture elokus that's l'mayla m'chachma. So b'meila, what it is is Elikus, but it's in the limited form of Surah's Chachma. But at the same time, in this Surah of Chachma, it still senses, it still has some, it's still in its state of being, somewhat identifies also that something is Shalei Be'erech. I just wanted to explain that. So now he's going to speak about this on a more specific level with Kalim. He says, V'hinei b'mokem acher mavuar. Now, elsewhere it's explained that moshel de gili haseichel mekeich hamaskil, that the moshel of the gili, of the revelation of intelligence, from the source of intelligence in the nefesh, hu al kalim d'atzilus. It's specific. It's on kalim of atzilus. In other words, we're talking about seichel, the klei haseichel, from the keich hamaskil. Let me correct that. No, not necessarily. It's a moshel for the kalim of atzilus as they connect with their source. That what? That the kalim are not margish as mekedom. So till here we were speaking as if it's both eris and kalim. Now he's saying the moshel elsewhere is explained on kalim. That's it. Ukiyadua. He's going to explain why. That kalim hebchin is briya sheba atzilus. In atzilus itself, I mentioned it yesterday, there's briya sheba atzilus. Even though atzilus primarily is iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'garmu echad, but bedakus, on a subtle level, there's an element of keli. And that there's an element of briya, which is the kelim of atzilus. Varizeh, and this is kemoshel haseichel, sheba b'bchinas ischatshus, memoker haseichel. The kelim of atzilus is like the example of intelligence that comes like a new thing from the source of intelligence, which is higher than seichel. She'ena margish mekede. And these kelim are not margish mekede, which means they are elikus, but they don't directly, in a revealed way, reveal the source. What's the nimshal? The nimshal b'zeh b'atzilus, hu b'bchinas kelim she'enu b'chinas dveikus b'mkedom. The nimshal of seichel that's not margish keich hamaskil, moker ha-seichel, it's moker, is a moshel for the kelim that are in that form of dveikus, so that are not in the form of dveik. I'm sorry, they're not cleaving and not attached to their source. I'll explain in a minute what this means. And they become an identity, a mitzias davar, a unique, a specific identity, a specific item. And nevertheless, in elikus, can move them a moshla now. And nevertheless, they're also not outside of elikus. They're elikus, as it's understood from the moshel. Seichel is an extension of the keich hamaskil. Even though the seichel may not feel its source, it's still an extension from there. I'm going to explain. I want to just read one more line. And being that these kalim are a defined and limited structured existence, that's why the kalim become a source for biyah. So the briya sheba atzilus will then become atzilus sheba briya, so to speak, and then ultimately biyah itself. So in atzilus you already have the kalim are more identifiable with the structure. So let's explain what this means. Let me go back to the moshel of, let's say, Asius, letters and words on a page. We're reading now Maimer here. There's Asius and words that we're reading, and there's a teichen that these words are conveying. So Bechlolis, Asius are like Kalim. The teichen is the Eir. You could read these words and not understand what they mean. So you're basically holding on to Kalim, and you don't sense the Eir in it. So a person can read Hebrew, doesn't understand what this means. You could also have Eir without Kalim. You could have an idea, but you know it's not packaged, it's not expressed in words that we can hold on to. You know, sometimes an abstract idea. Someone gives you a hafshatadik idea and say, what did you say? Even if you may have gotten something, but you need handles. So basically, we need both, a combination of both. But what's the difference between the two? When they join together, it's seamless. You don't even see the difference. When you read this properly, you understand it properly, the letters are just channels of light, like the projector of white light and the film that lets you see a picture. So the oisius are only here to depict and give us some picture of the idea. But now you have the idea in protim, in details, in words and letters and so on. That's when they're aligned. But if you were to dissect it, let's say you separate the oisius from the ideas. So you could have, as I said, read letters, and the letters themselves are not attached to the idea, and more importantly, not attached to the one that is conceiving of the idea, because to the chokhmah to write words is not necessarily the same chokhmah to convey ideas. You can have a person who's a very brilliant person, but they don't know how to write. They have to give someone else to write down what they say. You have that. My point that I'm saying here is that the Kalim's focus, the Asius, is to make sure it's said the right way. The details, do you write this word? Do you write that word? How do you edit it? In other words, it's making sure that it's expressed the right way. The Eiris Inyan is to express the idea. So the Eiris are always connected to the Baal HaMachshava here. Whoever the author, whoever the Mechaber is, the Eiris are about his ideas. The letters are the way he expresses the ideas. So the expression of the Kalim is on its own, not necessarily dovuk to the Mokir, to the Mechaber. Now, what does that mean in the context of Atzilus? The Eibishter wanted to create the world. So we're talking about the example of the chief of staff. The chief of staff's inyan and function is only to convey the orders of the king. It's not, he does not have to get parkezech and get involved in the details. He comes every morning. The king tells him, these are my orders today. And he goes and meets with all the chiefs of the department heads. You deal with the mailing, you deal with the agriculture, you deal with the military, you deal with the taxation, whatever it is. The people who are the heads of the departments and the workers under them can't be sitting and focusing on the Eiris. Their job is the Kalim, to get the job done. If they all decide they want to sit in the king's palace with the chief of staff and they want Yechidus, they're not going to get the job done. So the role of a Keli is bittul telekus, but the bittul is through its function, not through the connection to the melech, so to speak. The Erzinian is to make sure that the melech's guidelines are focused on. So in the context of, let's say, a brocha, Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvaysiv l'tzivanu lahadlik ner Chanukah. Asher kedeshanu b'mitzvaysiv l'tzivanu is the chief of staff, making sure that this is God's, it's aligned with the what the Eibishter wants. Lahadlik ner Chanukah, you have to focus now, take a candle and light a flame. You can't be dveikus of Yechudei law and connecting to the highest levels of Elikus, because the Eibishter wants you to do this mitzvah. You can't suddenly go out his game from Klei HaNefesh. Now, both are following God's guidelines, but one is the dveikus to the makar, and the other is the focus on what the makar wants, the matorah, the end in mind. So both are elikus. The difference is, one is elikus in what the Eibishter wants you to get done. That's why it's not begoli mamish, like he says, it's be'efer shalis chachus. Because what to get done is outside of the palace. It's outside of the Eir Davuk. On the other hand, the Eir Davuk's role is to make sure that what is getting done is aligned with the Mokir. To put it in different areas, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti is the chief of staff, making sure that it's bedveikus to the Mokir and exactly what the Mokir wants, Yesh Amiti. The Ayin of the Yesh Nivra, its focus is to make sure the Nivra is the way God wants it to be. That it should be Yehi Eir, Yehi Rakia. If Yehi Eir and Yehi Rakia decide they want to be Nichlo in Bereishis Bara back into the Mokir, you're not going to have Eir, you're not going to have Rakia. Like the story with the Rebbe Rashab was once saying a Maimach Chassidus. And he was so bedveikus, completely connected, so bedveikus that the Bochrim and everyone there, they were pushing that to the extent that the table that the Rebbe Rashab was sitting at broke. So they moved the table out. when the Maimer was over, there was no table. The Rebbe Rashab was sitting like as a stamazeh. Imagine a fabrenga without a table in front of him. So the Rebbe Rashab said, he said that Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever was once doing kaparas, Erev Yom Kippur, and so he did the Zech Alefasi, etc. Then he closed his eyes b'kavana atzuma and dvekus atzuma before to shecht the chicken. By the time he opened up his eyes, the chicken ran away. That's the story that Rebbe Rashab said. So the Rebbe explains, I mean, Pashtus, what it means is, very good, the kavanas were all there, but you can't do the mitzvah. So you had the dvekus he had, but you didn't have the chicken. You have to have the knedlach. You need the knedlach. Like people, fundraisers say, when they come to someone to raise money, so he says, amen nish da hagoda, amen the knedlach. So you say the whole hagoda in order to eat the knedlach later. The point here is that the dvekus is beautiful, and you have to have dvekus. But then you have to have also a tzimtzum, so to speak. You need kalim, you need a chicken, or you need a table. So you have to have a combination of both. Now, obviously, there are many people who have the table and they don't have the dvekus. Atzilus is a perfect mix, where the eris, the dvekus, is connected with the kalim, which that will then become the structure. So he says the muscle that we're learning about seichel and koyach hamaskil is on the kalim. That the kalim are there, they're seichel, but they don't feel their source, because if they felt their source, they would not be able to function as a specific function. So the kalim is not, it says einem beginnes dvekus.
But they feel that there is a source.
What's that? But at the same time, it's not outside. It's still aligned with what the Eibishter wants. Obviously, if the keli starts doing something that's not connected to Ratzon Hashem, that's not kalim of Atzilus. That's kalim of Asiyah maybe. But the point here is that that you have both elements, because you need to have, when you're creating something, you need to have the dvekus, you need to have the function, so to speak. It's like Shema Etzem or Shema Teyar, or more Shema Teyar and Shema Pa'ula, however you explain it with the names. What were you saying?
Levushim Atzmiyim. He called it before, Levushim Atzmiyim.
Right. Okay, fine. Okay, good. I hope that was helpful, because I think it's vital to, we read so much about Eris and Kalim, and you don't always spell out what exactly is a Kali. What does it mean? You're saying the Kali is Elikus, Iv and yet you're saying it's not Bedvekus, it's Bischatzus, and so on. Okay. Now, what I'd like to think about for a moment, before we go on, in the context of what I said yesterday, like Avram Avinu or the Alter Rebbe, that they weren't aware of Elikus, they were walking Elikus. Chesed Atzilus on earth was Avram Avinu. So I explained that it wasn't like you're aware that the Eibishter wants you to do Chesed. That's by us. Rabbi Hillel was aware that Friday afternoon you go to sleep. Alter Rebbe fell asleep. So the interesting question I would like to pose is, what is the difference between the Eris and Kalim of Avram Avinu, of the Alter Rebbe? Is the way their function, is it different than their Merkava, so to speak, and Bittul Telekus, of the Oyed within them and the Keli? Both of them is for sure a state of being. But there's a difference, because one is focused, I guess, on the Lakusha Bezeh. Like, for example, Friday afternoon, the Alter Rebbe fell asleep, but Friday night, he was awake. So in other words, you need to know that even when you're completely bottled in Davuk, it doesn't mean every moment is the same Aveda. So you have to have a tziyur. So it could be that the Kalim is the tziyur of the Aveda. Like Shabbos is Shabbos, Sunday is Sunday. The Dveikus, when you eat matzah, is different than the Dveikus when you light Chanukah licht, or when you shlok kaporas, or whatever the mitzvah may be. So in other words, the Dveikus Shebezeh is that they're completely aligned with what the Eibishter wants. The Tziyur Shebezeh would be the Kalim. So they're both completely aligned, but one is the focus on the Bittul, and one is the Dveikus, and one is the focus on what you need to get done. And if the Alter Rebbe like a story with Rabbi Avram HaMalach. They were learning. And Rabbi Avram HaMalach was about to expire. And Klei Nefesh, he gave him a bagel and butter to ground him. So the Alter Rebbe had the presence of mind. He had the kelim, not that Eis game mitzias. Then you become Eir. The keli, the ability to be mekabel the highest levels of Eir and Dveikus, and still maintain the composure to be able to understand we are here in this particular way. Like it says about Moshe Rabbeinu and Nevuah. All the Nevi'im had to roll around. They had all kinds of different things they went through to be mekabel Nevuah. Only Moshe stood on his feet and was able to be in his presence of his Shiur, his kelim, and being able to be menave, being able to prophesize. So I'm just talking it through for a moment, that you need both. When you want to convey something melikus, you need the elikus shebezeh, but you need also the tzir that the Eibishter wants right now. You should do this. You can't have dveikus and then you're doing one mitzvah, you're not doing another mitzvah. And every day has its own birur. You know, batel yeme, batel karbana. You can't say, oh, I'm a dveikus today on Thursday, and I'm doing the Aveda of Monday. No, Monday has a different Siyur Aveda. So I'm just talking it through in the sense of distinguishing between the bitl of the keli and the bitl of the Eir, so to speak, which is one is dveikus and one is focused on the specifics. Yeah.
You said only Moshe, but Moshe there was also kelim. So it looks like by this kind of people, the kelim is of course different. The Oris and kelim are the same person. Oris is the dveikus and the kelim the kesher to lamato.
Exactly. Yeah. Correct. Whereas the Nevi'im that couldn't do that, Eimdim al Omdam, because their kelim they couldn't do that. They had to.
The Alter Rebbe fell asleep on Friday, not because he was tired.
Of course.
He felt the dveikus.
Or he just didn't even feel it. It just was. He was that. Dugma l'mayla. That's what happens. That's what you do. Look, we don't have to make an effort to breathe, right? You don't have to tell yourself, hey, breathe every second, right? Why? Because we're wired that way. We naturally breathe. By a tzaddik, when he does a mitzvah and he's aligned, he's just naturally doing that's nature. That's the nature of his neshama. We don't have that type of connection to Elokus. But someone who's like that, just like we breathe naturally, he falls asleep naturally on Friday afternoon because that's the Durmita Dezai is completely mechuvan l'lamayla. That's what. In other words, we have a long way to go. Okay, that's the kelim. What about the eris? So he says, "Amnam b'chinas eris datzilus." However, the eris datzilus k'mosh shehem mebchinas ein sof ha'maitzil, how they come from the infinite divine emanator, the source. Yuvan al derech mashal with a different mashal. That will be understood. Derech mashal is going to give another mashal. So in other words, the kelim, now he's explained, the koyach hamaskil and the seichel, there's two sides, is the kelim. That there is that's why it's not margish as mekere, because its focus is on the structure of what it has to do. And yet it's elikus. What about the eris? The eris are dovuk b'mkeram. So he says, here's the mashal. It's the al-derech mashal, like the extension or the growth of the branches from a tree. So you have a tree, the trunk of a tree, and then it branches off into branches. The branches are part of the tree, as he's going to explain. So he says like this, Sha'ikirhu ha'ilon. The primary thing is the tree itself. Va'anofim ha'mispashtim ano va'ano. And the branches that extend this way and that way. Like in a tree, you have branches this way and that way in all the different directions. Heimrak koyach ha'ispaschtus min ha'ilon. They're only the extension, the power of extension from the actual tree. They're not separate because the branches are branches of the tree. They're not cut off. They're branches of the tree, but they're not the core tree. They're extensions of the tree going different directions. So that's a mashal. They're not the core tree trunk. Now that doesn't mean they're not tree. They're part of a tree. The branches of a tree are part of the tree, but they're not the core tree. They're extensions. In other words, if you cut off the branches, you still have the tree, the main tree trunk. So they're an extension. They're not something outside of the tree, but they're not the core tree. That's the mashal that he's saying here. The einam etzem me'ilon klal, they're not the core tree at all. But they're attached and they're united with the tree. Remember, by kalim, we didn't say the word dvukim. Kalim are aligned with what the tree wants you to do. In other words, what the mokir wants you to do, like seichel is but it's not dovuk and meyuchad. That's what he's saying now. We're continuing, and we see sheikat tzmichas haperes hu ala anofim. He's continuing to develop the mashal that the primary growth of fruits in a fruit tree is not on the tree trunk, it's on the branches. He says primary because I'm sure there's some exceptions, but generally speaking, the fruits, whether it's apple tree or whatever type of tree it is on the branches. V'nimtza. So what do we derive from this? What's the conclusion?
The trunk will give out fruits. Tam eitzer yuper yoshavim.
Yeah, but the fruits don't grow on the trunk; they grow on the branches.
Maybe the gilui from the etzem will be losi lovoi.
Okay, but fine. But I'm just saying, but Poel Mamish, most fruit trees, the fruits grow on the branches, not on the trunk. Look, they're different eitzim. Let's continue seeing where he's going here. 1 second. V'nimtza. So we derive from this. Shanofim hemetziyim mehelam elagil gilui. Here we go. That the branches draw out from a concealed state to a revealed state, koyach ha'ilon, the power of the tree. So in other words, two things he's saying here. The tree is the core tree. The branches are not the tree. They're an extension of the tree. And number two, they're attached and we're united. And number three, the fruits that grow on them is not because they have any power of their own. If you took away the actual tree and its roots, the branches wouldn't grow anything. The branches are only because they're expressing what the tree wants to express. In other words, as I said, if you cut off the branches from the tree, the fruits are going to quickly dry up. So the tree is the main force. It has roots that go into the ground that draw moisture in it. The tree grows. The anofim extend from it. They're connected to the tree and they actually grow fruit. By doing so, they're revealing the concealed power within the tree. All this is negated to the nimshal. We'll get to the nimshal. But right now we're talking about the mashal, the example. It's a completely new example. It's not the koyach hamaskil and the seichel used before. It was a very different example. So he goes like this. Okay. Hainu. This means due to the fact that the branches are only an extension of the tree, that's why dafka on the branches you have the growth of the fruits. You cannot have the growth of fruits from the very body and core essence of the tree. Shahua atzmi. That's the core essence. The fruits that are grown on it can only come from a reflection. He's already giving the nimshal here because obviously in a tree you don't have a ha'ora. But ha'ora means a hispashtus, an extension. And those are the branches. So going back and forth here. The tree itself is an etzem, and etzem is completely distant from any fruits, so to speak. It's etzem inyan. The fruits have to come through something that extends, which I assume he's going to go into the nimshal in a moment, but basically saying that the spheres cannot be, the pu'ulas of the spheres cannot be coming straight from the etzem of Ein Sof. Because Ein Sof is l'mayla mitziyut and l'mayla structure. It's higher than all structure and higher than all definition. On the other hand, so it comes through the spheres, which is already ha'ara, a reflection. But on the other hand, the spheres are dveikus. If the branches were not connected to the etzem, they wouldn't bear fruit either. So for chochmah, bina, and das, and all the Esser spheres, to do their function well and bear fruit, they have to be, and it's something that extends from the etzem, but is attached to the etzem. That's essentially what he's saying here. Yeah. So now comes the other side. So though the fruits can't come straight from the core tree, from the etzem, which is higher than it all, on the other hand, and only from the branches, but the branches only get that power because they're dvukim by ilan, because they're attached to the tree. Detach them, sever them, and they won't be able to do this. If they were not dvukim, if they were not attached, there would be no growth upon them. Only due to the fact that they're attached to the tree. And at the same time, they're only an extension, not the tree itself. That, therefore, you have the growth of the fruits upon them. This is the mashal. Pretty interesting mashal. It's a new mashal. I don't think we learned it earlier in Ayin Beis. The mashal is, the Alter Rebbe, I think, gives the mashal in Maimorim, but here he's elaborating. So now what's the nimshal? How he's going to bring it back to Atzilus. Remember, all this is coming to explain that Atzilus has dual properties. On one hand, it's a structure. On the other hand, it's a lakus. Levushim atzmim. So it's a lavush, but it's a lavush that's fundamentally connected to the thing that it is a garment to. It's an attached garment. But now he's distinguished between Eris and Kalim. And the Keiches HaNefesh, Keich HaMaskil, he associated now with the Kalim, because you're not margish as Mekerim. So this is really, the question is, does Atzilus margish as Mekere or not? So clearly he's going to a place that's saying the Eris are margish, and the Kalim are not. So again, you have Eris and Kalim, basically Das Elyon and Das Tachten, is essentially where he's going with this. Back to the Ayin of the Yesh Amit, Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra. He hasn't spelled it out yet, but that seems to be the place that he's going with this. So we just have to keep this all in mind. Remember, the Maimer began that all of Atzilus was Das Elyon, because it's all Elikus, nothing but Elikus. Then he said, in truth, when you break it down, Atzilus has both aspects to it. This is what we're in the middle of now, just to keep the focus here. So let's now go to the Nimshal, the moral of this mashal of the tree and the branches. And the example of this, of the tree and the branches, in the energies of Atzilus, not the Kalim, the energies of Atzilus. So here it goes. The Eris of Atzilus, Eir Chochmeh, Eir Bina, Eir Das, Eir Chesed, etc. These are an extension, like he said about the branches. These are branches that extend and are a reflection of from the infinite divine emanator. So the Maitzel here would be the Ilon, the tree. The branches is the Eris of the Esses Spheres of Atzilus. Vehein bebchinas dveikus be'erein sof. And these branches, the Eris of Atzilus, are attached to to the source, which is the Maitzel, the tree.
How is different? How is it different from Chochma and Koyach HaMaskil?
Well, the pastas is because the branches are margish as mekedam. They are attached to them. Whereas Chochma knows there's a mocker. Like it would be like, I'll give you an example. Let's say an apple falls off an apple tree. So the apple knows it comes from somewhere, but it doesn't know in a personal way what it comes from. Whereas the branches and the fruits on the branches that are connected to the tree are fully an extension and completely aware of their connection. That would be like an example, my own example of the apple falling off.
You could say the apple is not falling off also. It's even more. The apple not falling off. The difference between the apple and the branch.
You asked me what the kelim are like. So I'm saying, Chochma ma'ayin temotza, where the seichel is margish sheyesh moker, but it's not margish mekerei. You asked me how's that different between the branch and the tree. So I just explained.
My question is that even before it's fallen, maybe this is like...
no, if before it's fallen, it's dveikus. That's what he's saying. It's eidus. It's not
the
kelim.
apple, even the apple, or only the branch?
To me, both are the same thing. Because the apple is attached to the branch and the branch is attached to the tree. What you're doing now is you don't have to break my moshel into more details. You asked me a question. What is the difference between seichel and koyach hamaskil and the branch and the tree? The difference is very clear. One is attached, and he said the seichel is not bedveikus lemoked ha-seichel. That's why it's a chidush. The branch is not a chidush. The branch is connected and is an extension of hispashtus. It's not my words. That's exactly what he said here. You asked me I gave the moshel of the tree, that apple that fall off. Let's say a branch that falls off the tree. Forget about the apple. A branch falls off the tree. So it's no longer dveikus, but it does have a mocker. The branch that's connected to the tree is hispashtus and dovuk and miyuchad to the tree. Use that. Forget about the apple. Use the branch. Now, Kamuv and Kalim of Atzilus is not broken off, but there's some hefsek, there's some leap, because it's hischachus, as he said. Kidu Kalim b'chinas briyish of Atzilus, he says, hischachus einam margish mekerei. He said, Kalim einam b'chinas dveikus. The branch of the tree is dveikus. The koyach ha-seichel is not b'chinas dveikus to the koyach. The seichel is not dveikus to the koyach ha-maskil. That's why it doesn't feel it. It only feels that there is a mocker, but not what the mocker is. I'll go even a step further. The branch is made of the same wood as the tree. It's not only margish mekerei, it's exactly the same material. The branch is not a new entity. The branch is not made out of glass or out of metal. It's made out of it's the tree has extended into a branch. So sachakal is the same wood, the same color, the same everything. The only difference is this is etzem elon and this is hispashtus elon. Okay. In Kalim, as I explained before, it's the function that's negeya, to get the job done. It's not about being an extension and a dveikus to the market. So on Kaponim, this he says is Eidus of Atzilus, Shem b'chinas dveikus, b'chinas dveikus be'erein sof. So it's on one hand, it's a netzal. On the other hand, it's connected to the maitzil. Okay, I think we'll stop here because now he's going to go and explain how the Eidus are involved. Remember, the Eidus, as much as they're dveikus, they're also involved la'anhaga bohein almin. Remember when we said before, afikas eser tikunin, the karin lon eser sfirin is not just kelim, it's also Eidus. So he's going to explain now the other side of it, that though the Eidus are nispashtus and they're dveikus, they still are involved in creation, in the creative process. However, it's different than Eidus and Kalim. That's what he's been making the distinction here. So we'll stop here. It's basically a middle